Hello and welcome to a very special edition of View from the Danube. We're coming to you not from our Budapest mothership, but from the Tusvanyos festival at the heart of Transylvania. I'm joined today by Zsófi Ratz, our communications director at the Danube Institute, by Gladden Papen, the president of the Hungarian Institute of International Affairs, and as ever by István Kiss, the executive director of the Danube Institute. Now, we have all been here at Tusvanyos, this festival, for the past few days, but can you give our listeners and our viewers who aren't familiar with Tusvanyos a quick sense of what this festival is all about and why are we in Transylvania? István?
Well, I mean, I think you have to be here to really understand what this festival is and to kind of appreciate it. But it's now been going on for more than 30 years. So slowly after the regime change, they started this festival, actually mostly kind of young Fidesz members, but also some young Hungarians living in Transylvania.
But why Transylvania? Let me just cut you off there. Why Transylvania is, for a lot of Westerners, the sort of mythical place that we know only
Dracula.
Well, I didn't want to say it, you said it. But why is it important to the Hungarian nation?
Well, I mean, of course it's important because there is still a very significant Hungarian minority living in Transylvania. As a lot of people might know, but of course a lot of people don't know, Hungary was much bigger during most of its history, but in the past 100 years, it's been a smaller country, so to speak. So there's a lot of Hungarian minorities living in the neighboring countries, sometimes close to the border, sometimes not. In this case, actually very far away from the Hungarian border. You have a fairly big Hungarian minority living in basically the middle of Transylvania. And going why here, I mean, yes, there's an element of Hungary is a cultural nation. So it's, actually the Prime Minister did say this, that for us, our nation doesn't have borders in the sense that we have to take responsibility for Hungarians who are not living in the Hungarian...
The state is not the same thing as the nation.
As the Hungarian ethnic nation, yes. And we have a responsibility towards these people. And of course, sadly, under Ceausescu, the communist dictator of Romania, he was very oppressive against all minorities, but of course, especially the Hungarian ones. So bringing a kind of a young festival here, political, cultural festival, was, I think, a very strong show of support to the Hungarian minorities who have suffered a lot during this communist dictatorship. But also, as I said, I didn't finish this actually, but it wasn't just Transylvanian Hungarians, Hungarians, it was also Romanians, or it was also some other people coming in and kind of trying to make this cultural festival, which originally was also about bringing together Romanians and Hungarians. And it is still, to some extent. I mean, sometimes, sadly, the Romanian-Hungarian relationships have been strained.
I've noticed.
But actually, this year, I think you had again a significant number of Romanian speakers. And I think, I mean, what I saw personally, and I hope I'm not going to offend anybody, but you did have years when the Romanian police, should I say, force here wasn't very friendly, and you could feel the tensions. And now there was a big show of force, I think, from the police, but all of them were very cautious, nice, and you could see that the Romanian authorities also put in effort to make this festival successful and kind of without any tensions or problems.
Okay, so Zsófi, we're here in the heart of what is called Székelyland, but most people outside of this region don't know who the secular people are. Why is it important for the Prime Minister of Hungary to come to Székelyland? What is the symbolic importance of that?
I wouldn't even say that it has a symbolic importance because the symbolism has always been there ever since this government has been in power. And this is exactly where you can have a grasp of what it really means in reality, because the symbolism is a nice thing, but here, this is the festival where you can really feel what that means. And when the Prime Minister says that only a state has a border, a nation has not, you come here and you feel what that means, because you meet Hungarians who are not living in Hungary, but for you, it's self-evident that you are one nation. And it's so self-explanatory that it's kind of hard to explain it to someone who has never been here before. But it is a feeling, sense of belonging, and especially the slogan of this year, which is "You can count on us."
And you were saying the slogan, you can count on us.
You can count on us.
That was this year's slogan,
This was
right?
this year's slogan. And I think that says a lot about how people, no matter where they live, Hungarians, no matter where they live, are united here. And people are here from 6 continents. And someone coming from Lebanon or Azerbaijan can really see that Hungary is not just a state of the Hungarian state. The Hungarian people are everywhere, and they are a nation united.
Now, Gladden, we're both Americans, it strikes me as significant that when we hear Prime Minister Orban talk about the clash of civilizations, and we'll get into that later in our discussion, it matters a lot that he's doing it in the homeland of the secular people, because they have always had a reputation, at least among the Hungarians, as being outposts of defending the West. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Well, this was the first land that the Hungarian tribes came into when they entered Central Europe and eventually selected the Carpathian Basin as their homeland. And what's happening at this conference is an important part of the intellectual and political feedback loop of Hungary and all of Central Europe. This is a very unique event where you have the ordinary people of this, ordinary Hungarians from Romania, so from Transylvania. You've got the political leadership coming in. You've got think tankers and other intellectuals here, and they're all basically camping out for a week. And there's nothing really like that in Western Europe. There's nothing quite like that in the United States, of course, different type of country. But it's a very unique event in that way. It's the moment where Prime Minister Orban reflects on the big strategic questions, where really all the questions are open. What's the nature of the West? What is the future that it faces? What are the challenges? Now there's an election in Hungary next spring as well, so that was on the agenda also. So it's a unique environment that's one which draws forth these more reflective conversations and therefore becomes an important part, as I said, of this feedback loop.
So the Prime Minister finished his speech a short time ago. Let's start by getting your overall impressions of the speech. How did he do? How do you think it will have been received by the people here? And how will it be received by the international audience? Because this speech at Tusvanyos always makes headlines around the world.
It's always a knock your socks off type of speech. And this year, I think he went to the heart of the strategic questions facing Hungary and Europe. It seems that Europe is planning for war. It seems that they want the war in Ukraine to continue. And the budget, which has been talked about here in Europe for the last week or so,
the European
Union budget proposed by the Commission for the next period really focuses on a huge amount of war spending. Now, the Trump administration itself has called for increased military spending in Europe. That's because European societies need to be able to defend themselves. They need to be able to take care of themselves. But what are they aiming at, and which direction are things going? Prime Minister was reflecting on earlier points in European history where these questions were put to the fore. And he cited the Battle of Poitiers in 732, when Charles Martel essentially defeated the Muslim forces that were competing for control of Western Europe at that time. And the Prime Minister pointed out that it was at that point, it was clear to the Franks that in order to defend their nation, they also needed to be Christian. This was the same thing. And throughout the speech, he highlighted that these important reflexes, these important realizations are now missing from European discourse, even with the migration challenge, which we're now coming up on a 10-year anniversary of. They didn't realize that the mass migration challenge, which he said today will only become greater in the future, was a challenge for the heart of what European and Western civilization means.
And we're going to get more deeply into the particulars of the speech, but I think you're quite right that I can't think of a single other European politician, or certainly not an American politician, who could give a sort of grand picture speech of where his nation and his civilization stands in history and the challenges of history, other than Viktor Orbán. So that's one thing that I find always impressive about his speeches. Jofi, what was your overall impression of what he had to say today?
I think we all kind of knew or kind of saw it coming that the war was going to be the main topic of the conversation, which is no surprise because it's affecting all of us in one way or another. But for me, what was a really clear message is to stay out. It's not a passive thing that you do, like, okay, I'm staying out of the war. It has to be
the war between Russia and Ukraine, you mean?
Yes, but again, as he phrased it, it's a European war as well, because it's happening here, and all of us are affected by it economically, military-wise. So it is the European war, in a sense. And for us, we have always said, the Hungarian government has always stated that we are staying out of this, but it's important to know that this is not a passive activity. You are just not going there and staying out of it. It has to be a very clear day-to-day decision of staying out of the war and how the war will affect each and every country in Europe.
István, your general impression?
Well, I was very much looking forward to hear the speech, and quite frankly, I mean, there some Hungarians, but also some international people were thinking, well, oh, let's look, I mean, how he's going to speak, because Orban now is in real trouble, because if you look at the polls and yada yada, and I think it was very clear that you didn't see anything like that here. So this was a very confident speech, where he was making jokes, and he was very kind of confident with his kind of vision, and also I think even about the next election. Of course, he said that it's a tight race and it's a democracy, so you can never know what will happen. But it was quite obvious that he was full of confidence and kind of very stern on what his vision of the world is and what is the vision of the other major party. I also think, very frankly, that it was important. I mean, it's always very symbolic, as we discussed in the very beginning, that he makes this speech here. But again, the main opposition party, Tisza party, tried to capitalize on Orban making this speech in Tihany, which he didn't say what they are saying, but basically they were claiming that he supported the far-right Romanian presidential candidate. And I think he made that very clear here, that that was not the case. But I think he also had a very strong message to the Hungarians living here, that Fidesz is still the party who is looking out for all Hungarians. It's not Tisza. And he actually did come here and say that, now in Romanian land, which was again a very kind of stupid mistake from Péter Magyar to say that.
Let me stop there. Péter Magyar is the leader of the Tisza party,
yes,
who is the chief opposition to Prime Minister Orban.
Currently, at least. He's the new star of the...
Well, yeah, but I mean, but Orban knows he's going to go against Péter Magyar. I just want to make sure our listeners who live outside the country understand who we're talking about.
Actually, he usually says that he's not going against him, but the keepers of him, who are the von der Leyen administration in Brussels. So he might be the face of the opposition right now, but even the bigger powers behind him are those in Brussels making decisions.
Well, this is a very big point that Viktor Orbán made in today's discourse, that Péter Magyar and the Tisza party, who are doing fairly well in the polls are more or less balanced. I mean, we're still months away from the election, which will be in April, but it's clear that Péter Magyar and the Tisza party are the greatest challenge that Viktor Orbán has faced yet in power. The Prime Minister today said that don't be fooled, said to his audience, don't be fooled, that Péter Magyar and the Tisza party will sell out Hungary's sovereignty to Brussels for the sake of money from Brussels and get Hungary dragged into this awful Ukraine war. Do you think he made that point well? Was it credible?
I do think it was credible because he has listed the reasons, like the actions that the Tisza party has taken in the past that led to where we are today, that they are receiving the instructions that they have to do from Brussels. So I do think it was very clear. And again, when it comes to the elections in April, of course, we still have months until that election happens. But the speech was such a grounded and confident speech and did address the challenge of facing the Tisza party. So he didn't just pass the topic and did not talk about it. I think he was very clear in addressing the challenges and addressing the people about the decision that they have to make.
But what grounds do we have to believe that the TISA party is receiving instructions from Brussels? I mean, clearly it would make European Union leaders so happy to be rid of Viktor Orbán and have somebody else in there, even somebody like Peter Magyar, who was formerly of the Fidesz party, but is a turncoat now and is basically running as, I'm not Viktor Orbán. But do we really have any reason to believe that he is the puppet of Ursula von der Leyen?
Well, he's promised to deliver the money that the European Commission and European Union have been holding back from Hungary. Hungary has basically been blackmailed, or they've attempted to blackmail Hungary in order to push it to change its policies in recent years by holding up money which is otherwise due to Hungary. And everyone knows that that's the nature of the game. The Law and Justice government in Poland was facing the same problem. They were subject to these rule of law procedures whereby the European Union found that it was corrupt and the modifications they made to the laws were against European standards or whatnot. Just a couple of months after the new liberal government of Poland was elected, the European Union looked anew at Poland and said, well, magically all of the rule of law concerns we had have gone away. They've all been been solved. So everyone knows the nature of this game. And the TISA party has already joined, since it's elected to the European Parliament, has already joined basically Ursula von der Leyen's party, or Manfred Weber's party, the European People's Party. And everyone knows that the price of membership is to outsource your foreign policy to Brussels. So it is not a competition between two different versions of what Hungary is, or what the national vision is. It's a national vision versus an internationalist or globalist vision of the country. So it's quite a different situation from the Democratic and Republican parties in the United States. It's maybe more similar to, Trump versus the liberal internationalist uniparty, which used to run Washington, and in which the Republicans and the Democrats all had the same basically neocon internationalist foreign policy. Trump overturned that. That's the vision which Hungary has been offering. That's precisely what upsets Brussels, because maintaining their foreign policy stance or maintaining this internationalist environment is what keeps them in power. Otherwise, they wouldn't have jobs. And everyone knows that that's the score, that's the game. And the price of getting their support is joining their foreign policy.
And it's not new. So as it was mentioned, they started this in the previous election. So in 2022, you had the other star, Márki Péter, who was then leading this ragtag coalition of opposition parties from the far right to basically the Green Party, everyone. And even though he had made racist remarks, he had a lot of different problems, he was still kind of a star for the European Union. We really hoped he will win. And as was mentioned here, they started withholding funds actually about half a year before the elections.
Withholding funds from
the European Union. So it was
but let's make sure our listeners understand. Hungary is owed money by the European Union as a member of the European Union, but
also from the COVID recovery funds, which is basically a loan which all of us took out, and we're paying the interest rates, but we're not getting the money, and that should be for kind of recovering from COVID. So
exactly,
it's ridiculous.
And it's outrageous. They're holding this money back because Viktor Orbán and the Hungarian government won't toe the line that Brussels wants them to toe on foreign policy and LGBT and other things like that, correct?
Yes, but also it was very obvious that they started doing this before the previous elections in Hungary and in Poland. Luckily, it didn't work here. Sadly, it worked in Poland. And as it was mentioned there, miraculously, the money appeared after they won the election. And of course, we are trying to do it again. And one thing which was not really mentioned is, so this is kind of, there are some other people as well involved in the party, but it's still very much a one-man show. And he's making this kind of claims, as was mentioned, that I'm not sure he was actually a party member, but I don't know. But of course, yes, he was close to Fidesz. So he's making this kind of show that he's kind of a normal right-wing person. He will be following mostly what Fidesz is doing, but, a bit more, kind of more proper center-right conservative way. But I mean, he has people. He has now members in the European Parliament, and those people are voting. And we can see some of the voting patterns. I mean, they are wearing Ukrainian flag T-shirts in the EU Parliament. Not him, he's more clever than that. But some of his people do in the European Parliament. So it's pretty obvious that those people who he got elected there, which are actually, if you look at their profiles, are mostly left-wing liberals, are far more closely aligned to the European Union and its so-called values than what he's claiming his party is doing. So I think that could be kind of a very central problem for him in the actual election itself as well, because he will have to have people running for offices. You will have to have 106 members running in the individual member constituencies, even more people for the party list. So we will see what kind of a people, because now it's not really a party in a sense, it's more like a movement.
And let's not forget what the MEPs are saying, the TISA MEPs. There's one...
Members of the European Parliament.
Yes, Kinga Kollár, who is part of the TISA party. She literally said it out loud in the European Parliament that she really wants the Hungarian standards of living to worsen and for the Hungarian people to feel miserable, because then they will be able to overthrow the Fidesz government. And as a person who is elected by Hungarian people, you are there to represent their interests. And there you go and you say that all you hope for and all you work for in the European Parliament is for your own people to feel worse. It speaks for itself.
That's really strange. But
that's the ground we have for believing that they are the puppets of Brussels.
Now, I want to go deeper to geopolitics. Before we do, I have to say that one thing that surprised me a lot about this speech was whenever I talk to voters, just anecdotally in Budapest, I often talk to especially younger people who are basically conservative, but they're planning to vote for Peter Magyar because they say they're fed up with corruption, they're fed up with the healthcare system, they're fed up with education, the way Fidesz has handled education. Now, Prime Minister Orban didn't really address that today. He did talk a lot about the problem of communication, digital communication. He announced a policy, a forthcoming policy that will make it easier for younger Hungarians to buy houses at low-interest loans, which to help them become homeowners, which I think is going to be a positive thing. But I didn't hear him address the main things that people who have turned against him on the right say concern them. Have I missed something out here?
No, I think that he is not here to convince anyone. Like, he is not saying like, okay, I'm here and this is how I'm going to convince young people to vote for me. What he has said very loud and clear is that young people have opportunities in this country, and that's what they should have. Like, as a young person, the most important thing you can have is opportunities. And if you wish to live with that opportunity, you can do it here. And he did not come here with an agenda to convince young people to like him. He came here and said, these are the opportunities I offer you. Everything for you if you want to have a family, if you want to have a house, if you want to travel abroad, if you want to receive education from a university abroad. Here you have all these opportunities. If you wish to go away, you do you, because you're a young person. You're going to go away. You're going to discover the world. And then our responsibility as a government, as he said, is to wait for you so that you have somewhere to come back to. And once you come back to Hungary, you will feel that you still have a lot of opportunities. So I think it was a very grounded and clear vision of not trying to convince young people, but to make them understand about the opportunities that they have.
But
the campaign hasn't really started yet either. This is, again, a more strategic speech. But I think every political party or every government offers a package. And of course, there are things that dissatisfy people in their countries. There are things that they want to improve. But I think that Prime Minister Orban is also trying to keep people focused on the key parts of the package which he is offering and the key features of the opposition package that would come into place. So, it's not just a matter of like, the alternative is we could have the exact same government, but also fill potholes in streets or something.
Because that's what TISA is saying, that like you can vote for us, we'll get conservative government, but we'll do it better. And that's their claim anyway, right?
Yeah, and that's why I'm saying that every government offers a package. And so the alternative package that would come in would actually end up undermining some key features of Hungarian life. So for sure, an opposition government would be pressured by Brussels to change the Hungarian migration policies. So if that happens, and you're also trying to change the balance of social spending toward healthcare or education or something like that, well, what do you do when your hospitals are then filled up with illegal migrants who are coming in and burdening social services, right? We have seen this story in the United States border states over the last 20 or 30 years.
You and I both from Texas
right.
have lived in Texas, and we've seen it happen there.
Everyone knows how this story ends, and it ends in the collapse of public services. So if you have a party which adopts the Brussels or European line on migration or the European line on admitting Ukraine into the European Union, then you can kiss goodbye to all of the fundamental social services that make up a state and a nation. So, of course, there are things that every government wants to improve. I'm sure there are many things on Viktor Orbán's wish list for this country as well. But what is the fundamental element of the kind of conservative social contract that this government has been offering? It's pro-family, it's pro-nation, it's no migration, it's stay out of war. So within that, should there also be improvements, changes, more spending, whatever? Of course. But what's the framework within which you're having that debate? So right now, the opposition candidate is basically going around the country and say, well, look at this thing which is broken and look at that thing which is broken. The alternative package that's being offered, just as we've seen in Poland, just as we've seen elsewhere where left liberal governments come in, is one which washes away the foundations.
Right.
But also I think the Tusvanyos speech historically is never about Hungarian internal policy. I mean, he touches upon it a bit, but it's always more, as you mentioned, geopolitical kind of big visions. This is where he made the infamous illiberal speech, the first speeches, against migration. He endorsed Trump here first, back in 2016. So this is much more about what he actually mentioned now, is kind of Hungarian grand strategy, and not about kind of actual day-to-day political questions. And regarding the youth, I mean, he always said this as well, but the youth's job is to be rebellious. And of course, if you have the government who's been in power for 15 years, you will have, I mean, I'm 36-year-old. I would like to think I'm fairly young, but evidently I'm not really that young anymore. I remember the socialist government in Hungary and how bad it was. But now you have, generations who don't really have a real memory of that. Most of the kind of adult life or very conscious life was spent under Fidesz. So these people, of course, they might have some things that they don't have comparisons, so they will think if there's something wrong, but it's ultimately the government. But I think Orban kind of accepted that. But what we're trying to do, which was kind of mentioned already, and I think is very unique in the world, is trying to give young people better chances in life, because I think this kind of overall promise we had for the past, since the Second World War, I guess, that each generation has it better than the previous one, is disappearing in the West. Kind of the American dream, I think, in a sense.
Yeah, you're right, all across the West.
Yeah, and I think it's happening for several reasons. Actually, one is what has been mentioned, migration, because a lot of the housing crisis, I think, is because of this population coming in and getting cheap housing, sometimes subsidized by the governments, which is kind of crazy. But there's no answers for these young people who are trying to start homes. And this is, again, going into demography as well, because, I mean, you will be far less comfortable to have kids when you're in an apartment and you can be kicked out by your landlord any time. So what we're trying to do here for the past more than 10 years, and he actually mentioned this because there's going to be another program of low-interest loans with kind of a higher amount of money, is to help young people to own their own property, buy houses, which is as was mentioned, is a huge problem in the UK and most of the Western world. But it's a problem here as well, but it's less of a problem, and there's a lot of government support and programs to make that happen. And that's why he said, I mean, let's go out. I mean, have your wandering years, like in the Middle Ages when the guild members went out and so experience Europe, but you will realize that actually it's pretty good here, because you will see the housing market there, you will see the problems with migration, and I think there's a hope that that a lot of these people will realize that actually it's far better in Hungary than how we realized.
Now, let's go to the geopolitical aspect of the speech, because that's what's going to make the most headlines around the world, and that's what I think most of our listeners and viewers care about. It's extraordinary to think that 4 years ago, when I moved to Hungary, the war had just started between Russia and Ukraine, and Viktor Orbán was facing re-election. He positioned himself as a peace candidate, as a candidate who would keep Hungary out of this foolish war. And here we are 4 years later, and he's having to do the same thing. And it's just a remarkable thing, is it not, that we continue. And he also said today, talking to the people here, that this is not a war for democracy. That is a lie. Can you elaborate on that, Gladden? What did you think about him talking about what the war is really about?
Well, the Brussels elite want Ukraine in the European Union, and he pointed out today that one of the main reasons for that is that Ukraine, if it comes into the European Union, will reliably vote for them. It will vote for the people who brought them in. It will empower them more. They will be able to further carry out their vision of a United States of Europe, or a totally federal, post-national, liberal, international Europe. That will be the vehicle through which they do that. And he asked, how can it be that Europe would lose the United Kingdom and gain Ukraine? How would that be a trade? Well, it makes perfect sense for the elite who were trying to maintain power in that way, because the British were against them, being anti-federalists, if you will, in the European context. And so they were undermining the liberal elite, and Ukraine would reliably support them. So that's these measures are now totally politicized. Everyone can see that. It's clear in the region. The Western Balkan states have been waiting forever to join, and they're being blocked basically for political reasons. So unfortunately, from the standpoint of the EU political elite, the war has become a political issue for them. It's a matter of political survival. And just as the liberal elite in the United States adopted, bad strategic goals, but for the purpose of remaining in power, so too the European Union elite are doing the same thing. Like the DEI policies and the woke policies, I know we talk about them all the time, but what really were they? They were an attempt by the liberal elite of the American elite institutions, who had nothing else to offer, were not performing well. It offered a justification for them to stay in power. We have to stay in power because we're the only ones who understand what the next stage of liberalism is, and please allow us to employ thousands of administrators in order to bring it about. It's basically the same mindset in the European elite.
Yeah, and I think it was really important what Prime Minister Orban said when he talked about how former West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl was actually quite brilliant in the way he orchestrated the reunification of Eastern and Western Germany, because he had the right instincts and applied them at the right time. But, said Orban today, even having goodwill can cause war if applied in the wrong place at the wrong time. And this was his way of characterizing what's happening in Ukraine. It's not that he's against democracy in Ukraine. He's just saying that this particular policy pursued right now and in this place is a disaster. Sophie?
Exactly. And also just the very core message of how the European Union's what the European Union's attitude is towards the war is that it does not care about its own people, because this is not about the people anymore. This war is about the interests and the higher political powers. It has never been about the people. These people, the EU leaders never cared about the people of Ukraine, because if they did, this is not the way how they would act. Also, his attitude, the Prime Minister's attitude towards the war, is very similar to the one that he had or still has towards migration. he is very consistent about if he takes a stand, he is going to take it for the next 10, 15 years, as we have seen it, family policies, migration, and now the war. And he usually says, we might not be right, but we will be right. And this attitude is in everything that he does and in how he reacts to situations like this war.
But also, I think you made a very good point on how the European leaders have lost touch, but also maneuvered the European Union in this basically impossible geographic situation where they now have basically a trade war, impending trade war, and very hostile relationships towards all the great powers. So America, of course, with the trade war with Trump, who they see as this is what Orban said, but I think it's true on both sides. So they see Trump as this political, ideological enemy who they have to destroy. Of course, I think Trump sees some of the European leaders like it as well. But also with the war, they have this terrible relationship with Russia, again, a major power here. And then again, they started destroying bridges towards China as well. So they basically are in this situation where they basically destroyed good relationship with all the major powers surrounding Europe or who would be important for European prosperity. And that's kind of the very reverse of what Orban is trying to do with building these connections to basically every major player. So it's in their interest, as he said, that Hungary is kind of safe and stable. So it should be in the interest of all the major powers. And that is what he's been trying to do during his prime ministership. And I think that's a very stark contrast to what the European Union leaders are doing, who kind of lost touch. And also, I think it's even worse in a sense that Zsófia mentioned that they don't look at the Ukrainian people, they don't care. But I think that's true. I think, honestly, the whole thing is a farce because in the end, I'm not sure Ukraine could ever join. I mean, I think there's a lot of talk about it, but even their own people, I'm not sure. I mean, the European people would vote on that. But what is more disturbing to me is they don't care about their own people. Right. So the German MEPs or the French MEPs don't take the national interest first, or the interest of the French farmers, the German farmers, or the everyday German citizen, let's say. They care more about some fancy ideologies than their own people who actually voted them into that office. And that's very problematic, I think.
Also, I think he made a great point when he said, because he usually gets accused of not being independent, and he said that out of the 6 big powers, Hungary is now has a great relationship with 5 of them, and it's Brussels that we have our debates with, and how he said that it's not about being independent, because that's what he usually gets ridiculed about, that he's not independent, and he said it's not about independence, but finding the right balance. Mm-hmm. And I think this reflects in his attitude towards the war.
And I think one of the reasons that I really admire Viktor Orbán as a political rhetorician is that he will speak uncomfortable truths in strong ways. For example, today he talked about the European Union and its support for Ukraine as a way to disempower Vladimir Putin and return to the Yeltsin years, and as a way of helping European businesses. Now, to Russian ears, that's going to be explosive because they remember the Yeltsin years, which is to say the years right after the fall of the Soviet Union, as a time of rapacious cowboy capitalism when so many ordinary Russians were impoverished, their lives were made chaotic, and this benefited many people in the West. So I think that this will be an incendiary characterization by the prime minister, but not necessarily an inaccurate one.
Well, I think what he was trying to say here, that one of the goals is that if Ukraine wins, then basically eventually Russia will lose, and you will have Putin out of the picture, and then you will have this weak Russia, which the West can economically again colonize. So this is kind of the angle. Yeah. But even if this would be feasible, I mean, I don't think it is. But what I was always kind of thinking as kind of fancy thinking is, why do they think that if, let's say, tomorrow Putin is really sick, let's just assume that because they were saying, he has cancer and all these, kind of fantasy things. Let's say he dies or he's assassinated or something. I mean, why do they think that the person after him is not going to be actually far worse? So, I mean, we have all these kind of liberal, fancy assumptions about this war and a lot of these things which are just not based in reality. It's like, I remember, very serious people, I think even sometimes today, but certainly in the beginning of the war, we're talking about decolonizing Russia because Russia is still this imperial power. But I mean, who is going to be those states? I mean, it's anybody who knows Russia knows that. I mean, perhaps you would have Dagestan or some of these kind of very small Islamic republics, but it's just not realistic that Russia can be cut up because you don't have it. I mean, some of them actually are very distant relatives of Hungary living in Siberia. Some of these kind of almost Eskimo kind of people. I mean, those people will not have their own states. I mean, anybody who knows Russia should know that. But these people were really thinking that you can just carve up Russia and have these small states. And I said, I mean, it's a very serious liberal thinkers who are talking about this like it's something which will happen. And, you know, even kind of disregarding that Russia is actually a nuclear power, one of the biggest nuclear powers. So, I mean, let's say, even if they would be kind of doing badly in the battlefield, which we are not currently, I mean, what if eventually they will turn to that? I mean, God forbid. I mean, nobody wants that really. But I mean, why is the assumption that they will never do that? I don't think that's really a credible assumption. And also, why is it not really taken in context? So, I mean, kind of. No, so I'm just trying to say this here,
right. Well,
but there's a lot of kind of fancy thinking about this war and Russia's kind of possibilities.
Here's the thing: the European leaders can't even decolonize Europe. You know, and this brings us to the final point, I think, about Prime Minister Orban's speech today. He said something quite provocative. He said, in 10 years, whoever the Hungarian Prime Minister will be, will have to defend not only Hungary's southern and eastern borders from migrants, but Hungary's western borders. And he said this in context of talking about how in Vienna, for example, something like 41% of the high school students are migrants or of migrant background. And he said the great cities of Western Europe are becoming Muslim. We all know this is true. And he keeps insisting, and as he's done for years, on how this is really a clash of civilizations. He brought up today something that will shock, I'm sure, a lot of Westerners. He talked about the battle in the year 732 at Poitiers in France, when Charles Martel, the leader of the Franks, defeated the Islamic army and stopped the Islamic conquest of Europe. It's extraordinary to hear that in a political speech in the year 2025, but I think it was incredibly relevant. Why so, Gladden?
Well, we need to find within Western civilization some resource that we're willing to tap and which will enable us to make decisions again. A lot of the reason that the war has continued, just to bring it back to that larger geopolitical subject for a bit, is that there has been no strategic thinking in Brussels. It has been very reactive and ideological, not even with very deep analysis or not even a deep understanding of the historical or geographical or political or regime issues involved, but just with a very, very light ideological belief in the spread of liberal democracy everywhere. And this is a very weak form of thinking. It doesn't really provide an internal power for politics because it doesn't provide a framework through which you could consistently make the correct decisions to meet your goals. So István also pointed out this part from the speech in which the Prime Minister was reflecting on Europe's disconnection from the US. You know, it's fighting the Trump administration, its policy toward China, changes with politics. You know, if you look at the European Union each year, and each year it has a different relationship with one of the major powers, then there is no strategy, there is no long-term goal, there is no plan, there is no framework within which you can make decisions. Yes, a lot of Western European countries have come to regret their decisions during the 2015-2016 migration crisis. But again, if you lack the framework to make the right decision, then it might be too late later.
Right.
That's the problem that he's pointing to, because the migration challenge isn't just one from the past, it's coming again. And if we don't have the right framework in mind, He was suggesting, of course, a Christian and national framework. If we don't have the framework in mind, then we're not going to make the right decisions.
Precisely right. He said that when the great surge will come out of Africa, as we know it ultimately will, because Africa has such a massive population boom, he prophesied that Europe will not find the will to defend its borders because the population of Europe will already have become so mixed with all the Muslim migrants and the migrants who are already here, which is to say, that takes us right back to the fall of the Western Roman Empire. An extraordinary thing for a sitting political leader in Western Europe today to talk about, but I think a necessary one.
It's going to be a sobering experience, but not only for the Prime Minister of Hungary in 10 years, but also for the people of Hungary and the people of Europe. And the reason why it's a very tricky situation, for example, with young people, migration is a great issue or topic through which they can be manipulated into thinking that this is only a humanitarian crisis, and if they want to do something good, which ultimately every young person wants to do, you are here, you have plans, you have a vision, you want to do something good for the world, and then you have this topic of helping those in need, and this is how the way it's packaged, and you do believe for a few years that you are doing a good thing, and everyone who is saying otherwise is ultimately the evil. Bigots and evil. And the reason why it's going to be a very sobering experience, because once you see how this plays out in real lives, like the clash of civilizations and the surge of migrants taking over the culture of Hungary and Europe, ultimately it's not going to be a fight for Hungary as a country in a geopolitical sense, but the soul of Hungary.
Yeah. And not only the soul of Hungary, but the soul of Europe.
But I think, and we kind of partly discussed this actually before we started the panel. So for me, when he brought up the Battle of Poitiers, and he also referenced that when he goes to Western Europe and talks about how it's actually in our constitution, so we kind of acknowledge our Judeo-Christian background and also how it played a role in our nation-building efforts. It's kind of a very kind of central element of Hungarian thinking that our first great king, Saint Stephen, embraced Christianity, and that's how we could survive, because you had different, people coming in before, later from the steppes who disappeared, like the Avars, the Cumans, other people, and we could survive because we embraced Christianity. But also I think he made this because he was, I think, trying to make a case that was, for some of these European countries at least, the last time they felt another religion as an existential threat. So, of course, we had the kind of the Reformation and kind of the internal Christian wars, but that was still the same civilization and not like a completely different religion coming in and kind of being an existential threat. So I think he brought this up to show that these countries were kind of, in historic sense, luckier than Hungary, which had the Ottoman occupation and has a much more recent experience of this clash of civilizations, because I think it's a very essential element, and we can talk about that later on as well, about how he talked about cultural Christianity. So I think, and I think Glenn kind of hinted on this in the very beginning of this question, this round of questions.
I want to get to that.
But in the sense that we have to embrace our Christian culture, because this is what made us great. So culture and religion does matter. And a lot of, I think, Western European leaders forgot that. And I think there's going to be a hard reckoning because of migration. But it's not, that we can have this very nice discussion here, that we have democracy, that we have a lot of these human rights. It's not coming from the, Enlightenment or from the air.
This is not the gift of Voltaire.
Yeah, it's coming from Christianity, and it worked because people were still mostly Christian, or at least culturally Christian, and I think that's why it's kind of a stupid question where they kind of debate how religious the founding fathers were. It doesn't matter. The people were religious, and the founding fathers knew that in America as well, and they knew that this system will work because the nation itself is Christian.
Yeah, and we'll end by talking about something extraordinary I think the Prime Minister said today. He said that there were three eras of history in European culture and politics. There was one in which Europe was actively Christian, in a lively Christian way, in the era of Charles Martel and the centuries that followed. And then in more modern times, we became culturally Christian. The state was separated from the church and in legal ways in some countries, but the basic cultural Christianity was still maintained. That the prime minister said has been lost in Western Europe. He characterized that as a place of zero Christianity, but he said Central Europe is still at least culturally Christian. But if we lose that, then we have zero Christianity. And he said quite provocatively, I'm sure this will make headlines, to make same-sex marriage legal, that is when it has moved over to zero Christianity. What do you think he meant by that? And do you agree with him?
Well, I think that he's adding a kind of political perspective to the importance of Christianity. So we tend to think about Christianity as a individual matter or a matter of the heart, a personal decision. And without a doubt, it is. In fact, that's one of the essential features of Christianity as a religion, that it involves this free consent to baptism and to joining the church. But the element that he was bringing in, I think, with reference to this Battle of Poitiers and this the importance of Christianity in Europe is this. When we look at the recipe that we need for survival, what does it contain in it? If the nation or if nations feel that they need Christianity in order to defend themselves, that in itself will promote the resurgence of religion. People turn to religion not just as a matter of the heart, although again that's the required part, but because it is important and because it is essential. Yeah. That's even why why did Constantine convert to Christianity? Well, he saw the sign in the in hoc signo vinces sign in the sky before battle.
This in France today with the return to Catholicism.
Right. So leadership matters here. So the vision of the importance of Christianity, which leaders offer, matters. That's something that he's doing. What he pointed out is that, again, since we are Christian, it's not a matter of force or decision publicly, but it is a matter of the heart. So ultimately, he doesn't know if people will follow that path. But what is clear is that for Europe to defend itself, it will have to see Christianity as necessary.
And the reason why he said that the point when a country reaches the point of legalizing same-sex marriages is the end of cultural Christianity is because as a Christian government, you view the family as the most basic cornerstone unit of a nation. And if the cornerstone is missing, then you don't have a solid foundation on which you can build your communities, your country, and your nation.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, just earlier today, by happenstance, I was reading a speech that Pope St. John Paul II gave to UNESCO in 1980, in which he talked about the cornerstones of every civilization are nation and family. Now, of course, he meant within a Christian context, that God is clearly that. But, we build a nation, we build a sense of a society in which we live through family and through the community that we call a nation. And if you lose family, then you will lose the nation. And certainly, as the Prime Minister said, if you lose Christianity, we will lose the nation as we have understood it in the West. Something else will come along, but it won't be what we're used to.
Yes.
Ishvan?
I'm not saying I kind of heard every speech the Prime Minister said in the past 2 years, but I think this was a new element which we discuss here now. So I think, if it's not new that he talks about cultural Christianity, but I think years ago he still thought that most of Europe is still culturally Christian, because I remember this Pew Research thing which came out, it actually might be almost 10 years ago, but in that even in places like Scandinavia, most people were still baptized. And of course, church going, church attendance and other things might be very low, but still people kind of out of cultural norms or something like that, they still kind of baptize their children. There's still a fairly big element which goes like on religious festivals to the church. So I think previously he was saying that Europe is still culturally Christian. And I think that's kind of a stark contrast he's making now, that in the past, let's say 10 years, this sadly changed. and he can no longer say that, let's say, Western Europe is still culturally Christian. And I think it's partly because of the migration crisis and how, as it was actually mentioned with some of these examples, how this shift, and actually he did say this, at least this is my memory, he did say population change, again, very controversially, because they like to make this kind of great replacement theory and yada yada. But I think that was very crucial he made that. And honestly, I'm going to be very controversial here, but I loved how he brought up same-sex marriage as kind of the breaking point, because I see it like that as well. So I remember I was studying in Edinburgh when a lot of these countries accepted it. And I was really locked out of the classroom because I said, but look, I remember the Conservative Party in the UK accepted, and I was going to this kind of young conservatives club at university, and everybody attacked me. That how can you say this? This is a huge kind of success for the Conservative Party that we embraced this. We will get the young vote because of this. And I was like, no, you made a very big mistake, because you opened the door. And all the crazies will come in, and they were saying you're a bigot, you're crazy, it's not true. And we can see that 10 years later, more than 10 years later, we had to hold the transsexual movement. So now, we had the situation where really serious people were saying they don't know how to define a woman and a man. That's ridiculous.
And we were told it would never happen, and then it happened. I'll close that point by simply saying that in the mid-1960s, there was a prophetic American sociologist and cultural critic named Philip Rieff, who was a secular Jew. And he predicted that the greatest revolution of the 20th century was not the Bolshevik Revolution, as one might have thought in the mid-60s, but rather the sexual revolution. And he said that at the core of the Christian social imaginary, to use his language, was the control of sexuality and the way Christians thought about how sex should be used. That, said Rieff, has not held. And if that doesn't hold, Christian civilization won't hold. And I think everything we've seen has vindicated Rieff. And when you even break the barrier between, or break the bond between marriages, a man and a woman, it's over. Now, but can it be recovered? And let's end our talk today on this. Viktor Orbán said today that he thinks that Central Europe is going to be where the action is. That's, if Europe is going to be saved, it's going to happen there, because he said it is still culturally Christian. But he said, whether or not our children still hold on to the faith, which is necessary for the salvation of our civilization, depends on how well we have educated them, informed them in the faith. He ended his speech today by saying, now we will see what kind of parents we have been. Do you have any thoughts about that remark?
Well, as a young mother who is trying to be the best example for her son, I believe that's completely true, because children only take up on your example. Especially in their teenage years. You can tell them whatever you want. They will have their own mind and their own thoughts. But at the end of the day, what matters is the example that you have shown them. If you were able to motivate them in a way that they view that your faith and your attitude is authentic and it's not something fabricated. Because if they see that it's authentic and it's the way you live your everyday life, it's going to be something that they will want to, well, first understand and then embrace. And if you're able to do that, that's, again, it comes back to the question of the basic unit and the cornerstone of our society. Because if we can do that on a family basis, it means we can do it on a community basis. Then it means we can do it on a national basis and then on a state basis. So I do think it has to be, it has its certain levels, but we do have to start from the level of the family, of youth and children, and us being parents who they look up to and they find authentic and can view as an inspiration.
But
Left liberal civilizations cannot survive. They undercut themselves, and the family being the true basis of civilization, when that is undercut, everything else falls apart. So it's simply a matter of math over time. If people don't marry and have children, then civilization stops, or it will be replaced by something else. So you can imagine, you can feel that it's successful for a time, it's still going. But now in today's global competition, when there are successful non-Western societies, they're trying to basically be more conservative. People see the excesses that the Western European left liberal civilization pursued. They've already started to react against that in the United States, where I think everyone felt that I know we again talk about the woke ideology a lot, but everyone felt that it got pushed way too far. And that indicates that human nature is real. There is something that it wants to come back to. It's just a matter of whether we can pass it on successfully and whether we can recover it in time. But it is the natural mode of human civilization is conservative. And it's the only way that it can survive. So we just have to hope that we can recover it and that the balance returns to the center in enough time to save it.
In enough time. István, the last word.
Well, I'm kind of, and this is going to be strange because I'm a Hungarian, so I should be skeptical, but I'm a bit hopeful. So if I look at kind of recent trends in how, let's say, the Catholic Church is spreading, and of course it's spreading much more in, let's say, Asia and Africa than other places, but you can see actually a rise of people turning to the Catholic faith in America, in the UK as well, which gives me hope. So I think there is kind of an understanding because the cultural clash is happening now. So Poitiers is now happening again. Perhaps it's not as dramatic, but it's happening on the everyday streets of London, of Paris, of Belgium, where cultures do clash. So a lot of these young people now are going to schools where, let's say, they are the minority as, let's say, European Christians. And I think that's kind of or have some violent atrocity taken out on them on the streets, or they might have Jewish origins, not even practicing Jews, but some of these migrants still will potentially even physically abuse them. So they have sadly some of these bad experiences.
The culture war cares about you, even if you don't care about the culture war.
And I think that's changing. So I think more and more young people are kind of getting more conservative. But I think some of them are getting more religious as well. One thing which kind of gives me pause is, but it seems that there's kind of a gap between young men and women. So young men, I think, are turning more and more conservative, but I think that's not true for women. And you can see it with some of the voting patterns as well. For example, AfD, I mean, young male vote, they dominated very much.
The right-wing party in Germany.
Yes, but also my understanding is that Nigel Farage's party in the UK as well, Trump as well. So you have these tendencies that young males are becoming more conservative, which is very good. But on the other hand, it seems that women are on a very different path, which makes me sad, because in the end, how you will have families if you have very diverging groups of people. But still, to end on a positive note, I think there is kind of a change. And again, even in Europe. So I think, sadly, it's mostly rhetoric now. But what I'm seeing from the current German government, for example, how they are talking about migration, it is a huge change towards even like 3 or 4 years ago. So a lot of taboos have been kind of pulled out. And I think we are going in a very different direction. I don't think, I mean, like 2 years ago, I would have thought impossible that, let's say, Germany would deport illegal migrants or even migrants who are there legally but commit crimes. I think that could actually happen in the coming years now.
I'll finish out today by saying, with my customary pessimism, that I hope Orban is right, but I have my doubts. I think he's absolutely right that the future of the West depends on recovering our Christianity. Sadly, so many Christian leaders today, and I'm talking about bishops and pastors, are super sentimental about migration and are actually undermining the church itself by saying, open the doors wide to all the migrants out of human solidarity. I think that's a catastrophic mistake. Secondly, I think cultural Christianity, it's better than nothing, but it's not enough. Either Europe will recover the true faith, by which I mean people will start going to church again, will start living their lives by the faith and making actual sacrifices for the faith, or it's not going to matter, because Muslim migrants, whatever else you may say about them, they actually live their lives according to their faith. And the stronger gods will win out in the end, not necessarily the true gods, but the stronger gods. Finally, the thing I always quote from Viktor Orbán, whenever I give a speech about him in the West, is this. He said, people look to politics for meaning. I can't give them meaning. I'm a politician. I can give them things, meaning financial resources or passing laws to help them. But if the institutions that provide meaning, the family, churches, synagogues, schools, arts organizations, and so forth, if they don't step into the arena that has been opened by politics and do their job by proclaiming truth and meaning and discipling people in that, then any good that is accomplished by politics is not going to last. And I think that is the challenge that faces all of us, whether we're Hungarian, European, North American, whatever. This is the world we're living in now. And I think Viktor Orbán is one of the few, maybe the only Western politician who understands it in that way. I want to thank you all today for being my guest, István Kiss, Gladden Pappen, Sophie Ratz. And thank you all, our audience here in Tusvanyos. And thank you for listening to our conversation today. I'm Rod Dreher from the Danube Institute. Thanks for joining us at View from the Danube.